good evening all. Tonight we're continuing our look at the Spice cabinet of vehicles, skipping over the SE89 due to a lack of personal photos, and looking instead at the SE90, I believe the most prolific of the Spice designs. I suppose this would make it the garlic powder of the racing world in its contemporary milieu? The black pepper, maybe, depending on one's flavor predilections? Food for thought. Pun intended. Let us know your favorite spices in the comments below. I say us like there's other people here. It's just me. Let me know your favorite spices in the comments below. Anyway, similar to Chevron's iterative design approach that saw minor incremental improvements to their models year over year, Spice spent the latter half of the 1980s building increasingly successful prototypes, starting as a team and consultant offshoot of the TIGA engineering group to evolve into a constructor in their own right. Competing in IMSA Lights and Group C2 before moving upmarket into GTP and C1 with the SE89. The far more competitive top-class fields, however, meant that the successes of the previous years were not as easily replicated at the end of the 1980s, and they struggled in both Lights/C2 and GTP/C1 that year. Thus, the 1990 edition of the machines had to really turn up the wick in order for Spice to recapture that most savory of flavors: victory. I just want to say that I am genuinely having fun with all these jokes, even if they are, or perhaps because they are, just horrid. If I ever run into any of y'all at a historic race or something, I'll buy you a beer as recompense. Although BBC policy requires me to remind you that other beverages are available. After testing and some circumspection about their 1989 performances, the aluminium, extra I because British, monocoque chassis and carbon fiber bodywork were retained, largely unmodified. So too was the suspension setup of double wishbones, coilovers, and anti-roll bars. So if you aren't going to change your chassis or your suspension, what are your options? Well, you can make the car more slippery or you can make the car more powerful. In Group C, an engine change or size bump wasn't really feasible following the regulation changes in 1989, I believe first covered in the Peugeot video? Lola T92 video, that essentially eliminated the C1-C2 distinction and thus strong-armed competitors into running Formula One-derived engines capped at 3.5 liters. Both the SE89 and SE90 Group C cars ran a high-revving Cosworth DFZ V8 that sent its 459 horsepower to the rear wheels through, surprise of surprises, a Hewland 5-speed gearbox. Torque figures are a bit unclear, but it was likely within 20% plus or minus of the horsepower figure. Thus, in Group C, the only real option was an aero modification, and that's what they did. Still, going up against titans such as Porsche, Mercedes, and Jaguar, I can never remember how it's said one side of the pond versus the other. Anyway, Jag, and older Spice vehicles in the mix besides, even with the new Ecclestonian rule set, the SE90s just couldn't really cut it against the big-budget factory teams. Their best results came in the UK at Silverstone and Donington Park, where SE90s made it to the podium, but the Lola chassised Nissan not GTPs were consistent enough to pip third in the championship from the proverbial plucky Brits, while the stalwart Midlanders over at Jag smoothed their silk-cut selves into second with a number of podiums and a win at Silverstone that year, the one event where the Sauber Mercedes team choked and failed to finish with their C11s. Of course, with that preceding subordinate clause, the WSC champions for that year are rather self-evident, and Mercedes absolutely dominated the season, topping the podium at Suzuki, Monza, Spa, Dijon, the Nürburgring, Donington Park, Montreal, and Mexico City. Deutschland über alles, indeed. On the American side of things, however, there was a bit more flexibility. IMSA was in a healthier way than Group C post-Ecclestoning, and Spice had faced a generally higher level of competition in the series, particularly in Lights. Continuing their split strategy in campaigning both Lights and GTP, after de-emphasizing Lights with the 89 car, the SE90 Lights car kept the same power plant as the 88, but the works version of the GTP chucked the SE89's 5-liter Pontiac V8 and, continuing their General Motors partnership, replaced it with a larger 6-liter, some reports indicate 6.5, Chevy V8 motor Power jumped from 550 brake horsepower to nearly 700, which is considerable, while weight stayed essentially the same at 900 kgs all up, or 750 kilos dry. By contrast to the 9-round World Sports Car Championship season, the IMSA GT Championship had a whopping 15 rounds for prototypes, including the traditional 36 hours of Florida, which in 1990 was actually almost 39 hours, as Daytona and Sebring were split by a 2-hour, 45-minute sprint race in Miami. But the Spice Cars, despite running a variety of General Motors power plants in the ever-fruitless hope that diversity would bring excellence, never managed better than a second place at Lime Rock Park, with Nissan and Jag dominating the GTP Championship, only occasionally spoiled by Dan Gurney's All-American Racers, who ironically featured Juan Manuel Fangio II as their headline driver. He had maintained his Argentinian citizenship, which is what makes it ironic. On the other hand, Lights did prove successful for the marque, perhaps even more so than previous years, and the factory team comported themselves with dignity to best the Ferrari-powered Brieri racing team for the IMSA Lights Championship. Despite this not insignificant victory to add to their trophy cabinet, Orica has made much of similar results in modern racing, for instance, the Spice had run out, the East India Company was bankrupt, and at the end of the season, Spice Engineering went into receivership. While they would reform and continue to develop vehicles for a few years subsequent, the Spice was gone from their designs, and they would never again see the heat of competition that they had attained in the late 80s. At the same time, the SE90 saw substantial production for the era and type of vehicle that it was, with at least a dozen chassis produced, and they can actually be had at a far more compelling price point than their contemporaneous competition such as a Porsche 962 or Jag XJR11. I don't think they made enough Sauber C11s for really enough of those to make it into private hands to have market data. That brings us to the end of another video. Thank you for watching, and for this week's call to action not featuring the 3 sacred words of YouTube:
like, comment, subscribe.
I will again ask for your thoughts on the very strange sticker mentioned in last week's Bugatti video, as well as remind you all that there is never a better time than now to be thinking about your next vacation or trip abroad. I'm headed to Bolivia at the end of the month, and if anyone has any suggestions on things to see or places to do, I'd be happy to hear them. Also, YouTube has continued to deign that this channel doesn't produce any original content or add value to their platform, so rather than struggle against that, we're going to run with it, backpedal on my comments from the last Spice video, and I'll be keeping this channel without monetization. I'll be re-uploading some of the remastered videos, and shortly just be shamelessly asking for voluntary and nominal contributions to help keep me in electricity and camera lenses and graphics cards and whiskey, as those are the inputs required for video outputs. Hate that it has to be that way, particularly as I despise asking people for money, but them's are the breaks. Anyway, with that, I have but to say, as always, thank you for your time this evening, or whenever and wherever you are watching, and to wish you all a good night and a good tomorrow.